The steel barrier dropped across my hood before I could turn onto my father's farm. I slammed the brake. Gravel snapped under the tires, and the old brass key on my ring struck the steering column with a hard little click. Beyond the gate, cattle crowded against the fence beside an empty water trough. 3 weeks after burying my dad, I was being blocked from the land he had left me by 2 private guards wearing Briar Glen HOA patches. One of them stepped in front of my truck and raised his palm. "Back it up, sir. You're banned from this property." For a second, I thought grief had made me hear him wrong. "That's Mercer Farm. Not according to our authorization." He was broad through the shoulders, mid-40s, mirrored sunglasses, black uniform pressed too clean for farm work. His nameplate read Curtis Vance. Behind him, a younger guard rested one hand near a holster that held pepper spray and a radio. I lowered my window. Hot dust and fresh concrete rolled inside. "My name is Daniel Mercer." Thomas Mercer was my father. Curtis didn't blink. "I know who you are." That answer changed the whole scene. This wasn't a guard misunderstanding an address. They had been waiting for me. I looked past him. A new security booth stood where Dad's cedar sign used to lean beside the road. Fresh anchor bolts shone at the base of the barrier. Gray concrete had been poured over the shoulder of the lane, smooth except for one shallow ridge beneath the western post. Monument 17. Dad had pointed out that old survey stone when I was 12. "Never move it, Danny. Wood rots. Fences wander. Stone remembers." Curtis held a laminated sheet toward my window. "You've been issued a permanent exclusion order for trespassing, threatening community personnel, and interfering with HOA-controlled property." The Briar Glen letterhead was printed in blue. Evelyn Harwood's signature curled across the bottom like she had signed a charity invitation. I took out my phone and started recording. Curtis's jaw tightened. "Turn that off." "No, you don't have permission to film HOA security. I'm sitting on a county road." The younger guard glanced toward Curtis. That glance told me more than either of them had. Curtis tapped the paper against my door. "Attempt entry again, and we call the sheriff." A cow bawled from the pasture. Another shoved against the trough, metal legs scraping dry dirt. The well control sat less than half a mile beyond that gate. Dad had checked them every morning, even during chemo, because animals didn't care whether a man was tired or dying. I held the phone steady. "Give me the parcel number for the road." Curtis said nothing. The recorded instrument giving Briar Glen control. Easement, deed, court order. Whatever Evelyn says lets you ban an owner from his own farm. His mouth flattened. "You can discuss that with the board. So you don't have it." He leaned closer, voice dropping. "Mr. Mercer, you need to understand that this situation was settled before your father passed." My fingers closed around Dad's brass key until its teeth bit my palm. I wanted to drive through the barrier. The front bumper could have folded that aluminum arm in seconds. But Curtis was watching for anger, and the younger guard had already lifted his radio. So I made a different choice. I photographed the exclusion order, the booth, both guards, every anchor bolt, and the concrete poured over Monument 17. Then I backed away slowly. Curtis smiled as if retreat meant surrender. I had reached the county road when hydraulic motors whined behind me. In my mirror, a second steel gate slid across the lane, sealing the farm entrance from the inside. Then Curtis lifted his radio. "Mercer has been notified," he said. "Lock down both access points." Both access points. Dad's farm had only ever had one. Both access points. I pulled onto the shoulder and killed the engine. Through the windshield, Curtis watched me from behind the barrier while the younger guard walked toward the trees with his radio pressed to his mouth. There was no second entrance to Mercer Farm. Not one Dad used. Not one I remembered. Not one any ranch hand had ever mentioned. I photographed the guard disappearing along the eastern fence line, then drove straight to the county administration building. The probate clerk slid the transfer papers beneath the glass. 186 acres. Mercer Farm. Sole beneficiary, Daniel Thomas Mercer. Nothing about Briar Glen. Laura Kim read the exclusion notice in her office 20 minutes later. She was small, sharp-eyed, and quiet in the way people get when anger is being converted into work. "This isn't a court order," she said. "So it's worthless? It may be intimidation dressed as authority." She turned the page toward the window. But Evelyn wouldn't risk private security unless she had something recorded behind it. Laura searched the county index. Her fingers stopped. A document filled the screen, permanent access and road dedication amendment. Thomas Mercer to Briar Glen Homeowners Association. Recorded 18 months earlier. The attached map colored Mercer Lane blue and labeled it HOA Common Access. My father's signature sat above a notary seal. I stared until the letters blurred. Dad had been weak then. Chemo had hollowed his cheeks and made his hands shake, but his mind stayed hard as hickory. He forgot meals. He never forgot land. Laura printed the filing. Do you recognize the signature? It looks close. Close isn't an answer. I folded the page once, then flattened it again. He would have told me. My phone rang. Evelyn Harwood. Laura nodded for me to answer on speaker. Daniel, Evelyn said, warm as polished brass. I understand today was upsetting. You put guards on my father's road. Your father dedicated that road to the community. Briar Glen invested heavily in paving, lighting, and security. We're protecting what residents paid for. The farm isn't in your HOA. The road is. A printer hummed behind Laura. Evelyn continued. We can arrange supervised access if you sign an acknowledgement of Briar Glen's authority. Refusal may create additional liability. I looked at the cattle sale calendar on Laura's desk and pictured the dry trough. Send everything you claim my father signed. You already have the recorded instrument. I asked for everything. The warmth vanished from her voice. Be careful, Daniel. Grief makes people combative. I ended the call before my hand crushed the phone. That evening, I opened Dad's fireproof cabinet in the farmhouse office using the spare route through Ruth Bell's pasture. Tax receipts, vet bills, handwritten feed totals, no dedication agreement. At the bottom sat an unopened bank notice dated 11 days before Dad died. It confirmed he had placed original property records in document custody. Beneath it was an older letter from Briar Glen thanking him for allowing temporary road maintenance. One sentence had been underlined twice in Dad's red pencil. Maintenance shall create no transfer of ownership or control. I laid it beside Evelyn's recorded amendment. Same road, same parties, opposite meaning. Then headlights swept across the office wall. Through the window, two Vance security trucks stopped at the eastern fence, the second access Curtis had mentioned. Men climbed out carrying rolls of chain link and a sign already printed with my name. Daniel Mercer. Entry prohibited by order of Briar Glen HOA. I stepped onto the porch and raised my phone before the first fence post hit the ground. Stop right there. The hydraulic driver went silent. 4 men turned toward me under the white glare of their truck lights. Chain link lay across Ruth Bell's pasture entrance like silver wire waiting to close a trap. Curtis Vance walked around the lead truck. You're violating the exclusion order. I came through private property with the owner's permission. I kept recording. Show me the survey that puts this fence on Briar Glen land. His eyes flicked toward the sign bearing my name. Take it up with the board. I will. I photographed every post location, the truck plates, the contractor decals, and the fresh orange paint marking their proposed line. Then I called Ruth. She arrived in rubber boots and a canvas barn coat, carrying a flashlight like a baton. That fence crosses my pasture, she said. Curtis's expression tightened. Our map says otherwise. Ruth shined the beam directly into his face. Your map doesn't pay my taxes. They stopped work, but only after Curtis photographed me standing beside Ruth, as if permission itself needed evidence against it. By 9 the next morning, Laura and I had enlarged the recorded dedication map across her conference table. I laid Dad's maintenance letter beside it, then aligned both with the county tax map. The road curved the same way in all 3. The boundary did not. On Evelyn's exhibit, the western line had shifted toward the farm, swallowing Mercer Lane and the eastern pasture entrance in one clean move. How far? Laura asked. I need field measurements. She studied me. Can you do that without entering the disputed road? From Ruth's side, yes. That afternoon, I set survey flags along her fence and sighted across the old corner markers with equipment borrowed from my office. I checked every angle twice. Wind pushed dry grass against my boots. Across the road, a Vance security SUV idled for nearly an hour. The numbers refused to match Evelyn's map. Before I could finish, Laura called. Board meeting tonight. Evelyn added your property to the agenda. The Briar Glen clubhouse smelled like lemon cleaner and burned coffee. Nearly 60 residents filled folding chairs beneath framed photographs of perfect lawns. Evelyn sat behind a raised table in a cream jacket, flanked by board members and Curtis. She displayed the dedication map on a projector. Mr. Mercer is attempting to revoke a lawful agreement made by his father, she announced. Briar Glen spent substantial community funds improving an abandoned agricultural road. Abandoned. I felt Dad's brass key in my pocket and kept my hand still. Evelyn clicked to photographs of pavement, lights, and the security booth. These improvements protect property values and support our planned equestrian preserve. A rendering appeared. White fences, riding trails, and a landscaped entrance running directly along Mercer Farm. I stood. Where is the original signed amendment? Murmurs moved through the room. The recorded copy is legally sufficient, Evelyn said. Where is the board resolution approving it? The complete invoice file? Every communication with my father. Her smile held, but one board member looked down. You'll submit requests through council. I already did. Evelyn lifted a blue folder. Then your council will also receive this. Curtis handed Laura a formal assessment notice. $86,000 for road construction, lighting, security, and administrative enforcement. Payment due in 30 days. Lien authorized upon default. Outside, Ruth caught my sleeve. I worked in the recorder's office 31 years, she said. Your grandfather's oldest boundary papers weren't filed under Mercer. She wrote one word on the back of the assessment notice. Mercier. Then she tapped the equestrian rendering still visible through the clubhouse window. That road isn't their end goal, Dan. It's their way into the rest of your farm. That road isn't their end goal, Dan. It's their way into the rest of your farm. Ruth's warning stayed with me all night. By sunrise, I was standing in her east pasture with a drone case open on the tailgate. I needed current images of the cattle, the troughs, and the fence work without touching Mercer Lane. Ruth signed a simple permission statement while I photographed her holding it beside the property marker. It felt excessive. That was exactly why I did it. The drone rose above the grass with a clean electric whine. On the screen, my father's farm unfolded beneath me. Brown fields, the silver barn roof, cattle gathered around a water tank that should have been full. The main trough was dry. I guided the camera toward the pump house. A new chain hung across its door. Bright orange survey paint marked a line from the HOA gate toward Ruth's pasture, cutting through the same strip Evelyn's equestrian rendering had claimed. Then a black Vance security SUV accelerated down Mercer Lane. Curtis stepped out before the dust settled. He aimed his phone at the drone, then at me across the fence. You're conducting illegal surveillance, he shouted. I'm flying from private property with permission. You're photographing HOA-controlled infrastructure. That pump house belongs to Mercer Farm. Curtis smiled and raised his radio. Sheriff's office is already on the way. I landed the drone immediately and removed the memory card. I sealed it in an envelope, wrote the time across the flap, and handed it to Ruth. Put this in your safe. Her eyes narrowed. You expect them to take the drone? I expect them to take whatever Curtis tells them to. 2 patrol cars arrived 12 minutes later. Curtis met the deputies at the road with printed photographs, the exclusion order, and a written complaint already clipped together. Organized. Prepared. Waiting. Deputy Nolan listened while Curtis accused me of trespass, harassment, and aerial surveillance of residents. I showed Nolan Ruth's signed permission and the flight path on my controller. You crossed the property line? He asked. The aircraft did. I didn't. Curtis pointed toward the pump house. That entire corridor is Briar Glen common property. Ruth stepped forward. No, it isn't. Nolan rubbed his jaw. Until ownership gets sorted out, I'm taking the drone for review. Nobody's being arrested today. Today. That word landed harder than the confiscation. By noon, I had rented portable water tanks, fencing panels, and a stock trailer. The only lawful route left crossed Ruth's lower pasture, a steep stretch of ground Dad had avoided even in dry weather. Moving the herd cost me $6,000 before the first animal crossed. Halfway through, a calf slipped near the creek bank. Its rear leg folded beneath it with a sound I felt in my teeth. We got it upright, but it wouldn't bear weight. The cattle operator, Mason Pike, watched the calf limp into the temporary pen. I can't keep running stock through this route, he said. If access isn't restored, I'm out. After dark, I walked the temporary fence with a survey rod and Dad's brass key in my pocket. From Ruth's old corner marker, I sighted toward Monument 17. The measurements were wrong. Not random wrong. Consistent. Every point on Evelyn's map had been shifted exactly 22 feet into Mercer land. Headlights appeared behind me. Deputy Nolan returned alone. He handed me a property receipt for the drone. Across the top, in black block letters, Curtis had signed a formal criminal complaint. Nolan kept his voice low. "Mr. Mercer, one more access incident, and they're asking us to arrest you." Deputy Nolan's warning became official 48 hours later. Laura called before sunrise. They filed the lien. I sat on the edge of Dad's bed with one boot on and the other in my hand. Outside, the portable water pump rattled against its frame. The sound had become the farm's new heartbeat. Loud, temporary, expensive. How much? $86,000, plus enforcement costs. I closed my eyes. By 9, we were in court asking for a neutral inspection of Monument 17. Laura argued that the boundary stone could settle the road dispute before more damage was done. Evelyn arrived with 2 attorneys, Curtis, and a civil engineer carrying rolled plans under his arm. The engineer swore that digging near the barrier could rupture buried electrical and communications lines serving Briar Glen's security system. It was clean, technical, responsible sounding. The judge delayed the inspection pending utility verification. Evelyn didn't smile until we stepped into the hallway. "Now you understand why reckless people shouldn't manage shared infrastructure," she said. I looked at the cream-colored folder under her arm. "You filed the lien before the hearing. We protected the association." By noon, my bank had frozen the farm's operating line. The loan officer kept his voice low, like volume could soften the damage. "Until title risk is resolved, we can't release additional funds. I've banked here 12 years. "I know, Dan." He slid the unsigned renewal papers back across the desk. The corner caught against my knuckle and left a thin red line. The next call came from Mason Pike. "I'm pulling out," he said. I stood beside the temporary pins while cattle pushed against the panels behind me. Their breath hung wet and sour in the heat. "You've got 3 months left on the lease. I can't move feed trucks through Ruth's Creek Crossing. Insurance won't cover it. I'm sorry. You knew this farm before Briar Glen existed. And I've got a wife and 2 kids." The line went quiet. I didn't blame him. That made it worse. 2 days later, I watched 37 head of my father's cattle load onto trailers for an emergency sale. The calf that had slipped on the creek bank limped up the ramp last. Dad had tagged her himself the spring before chemo took his strength. The brass M key dug into my palm as the trailer doors slammed shut. At the livestock yard, buyers smelled weakness. They bid accordingly. By sunset, the herd was gone for nearly 30% below market. Evelyn used the loss before the dust settled. Briar Glen posted a community notice stating that unsafe agricultural operations had forced livestock removal and that the HOA's access controls had prevented further risk. A local neighborhood page shared photographs of the empty pens with comments thanking Evelyn for protecting residents. I read them once. Then I shut off my phone. For the first time, I wondered whether backing away from the barrier had been a mistake. Whether patience was just another word people used when someone stronger was taking what belonged to you. That night, Laura emailed the gate construction permits and utility records we had requested. I printed them at Dad's desk. The engineer's affidavit said electrical and communication lines ran beneath Monument 17. The permit drawings showed nothing there. No conduit, no trench, no buried cable. Then I found the contractor's inspection photograph. The barrier footing was still open, wet concrete shining under work lights. In the lower corner, half covered by dirt, the top of Monument 17 was clearly visible. And beside it stood Evelyn Harwood, pointing directly at the stone. I enlarged the contractor's photograph until the pixels softened around Evelyn's face. She stood beside the open barrier footing in white slacks and worksite boots, one hand on her hip, the other pointing at the exposed crown of Monument 17. The timestamp placed her there 4 days before the concrete pour. The utility plan beside me showed no buried line within 12 feet. She hadn't relied on bad information. She had seen the stone. I saved the original email, downloaded the permit file, and copied both onto 2 encrypted drives. One went into Laura's office safe. The other went into Dad's bank custody box beside the unopened records notice that had started this trail. Then I printed everything. Paper couldn't be remotely altered. At Ruth's kitchen table, I laid out the old maintenance letter, Evelyn's dedication exhibit, my 22-foot measurements, and the construction photograph. Ruth adjusted her glasses and traced the western boundary with one bent finger. "My memory wasn't wrong," she said. The oldest index used Mercier. The county archive opened at 8. Ruth knew which basement cabinet held pre-digital instruments and which handwritten ledger had never been fully scanned. We worked line by line, breathing dust that tasted like dry cardboard. Near noon, she stopped. There, the 1948 entry listed Henry Mercier, Dad's grandfather, and the neighboring tract that later became Briar Glen. The clerk brought out a bound volume and watched while Laura photographed each page under archival lights. The instrument didn't give away Mercer Lane. It allowed emergency passage over it until the neighboring land obtained another public outlet. Monument 17 controlled the western line. No transfer of title. No permanent dedication. I read the termination clause twice. Briar Glen's second entrance had opened 6 years earlier. The old privilege had already expired. That afternoon, the bank released Dad's stored packet. Inside were carbon copies of every road letter he had exchanged with Evelyn. He had agreed to paving because ambulance crews had once struggled on the gravel. But each letter repeated the same condition. Maintenance did not create ownership, jurisdiction, or permanent access. Dad hadn't surrendered anything. He had tried to be decent. Evelyn had treated decency like an unsigned check. I compared Dad's original survey exhibit with the version attached to the recorded amendment. The road curve matched. The acreage matched. But the boundary coordinates did not. Exactly 22 feet. Laura requested the electronic source file through formal discovery. The metadata showed a manual offset added 2 days before recording. It didn't identify who ordered it, but it proved the change wasn't a scanning error. Then the financial records arrived. Briar Glen's road project had paid Curtis's company nearly 4 times its original security estimate. Another large payment went to Harwood Site Development. Evelyn's brother owned it. A separate brokerage disclosure connected Evelyn to the proposed equestrian preserve through a commission agreement and a minority investment. The project required permanent access over Mercer Lane and an option on 30 acres of my frontage. The pattern finally locked together. The gate, the false dedication, the second fence, the $86,000 lien, the sudden concern about unsafe cattle. They weren't defending a road. They were lowering the price of the farm while making it harder for me to keep. I didn't call Evelyn. I didn't post the records. I built a timeline, numbered every exhibit, and made Laura challenge each conclusion as if she represented Briar Glen. Wherever the chain weakened, we verified it again. At dusk, I returned to the empty pens. The calves tag lay in the dust where the trailer had loaded. I picked it up, brushed it clean, and slipped it beside Dad's brass key. Then I signed 3 documents at the hood of my truck. A demand to preserve Briar Glen's financial and electronic records. A subpoena request for the original dedication files. And a formal settlement notice giving Evelyn one chance to remove the lien, reopen my farm, and submit to an independent audit. Laura sealed the envelopes. At 6:14 the next morning, a process server walked into the Briar Glen clubhouse carrying all 3. The process server entered the clubhouse at 6:14 a.m., handed Evelyn Harwood 3 sealed envelopes, and waited while she signed for each one. By 8, she had scheduled an emergency board meeting. Laura and I arrived that evening with 1 folder between us. No boxes, no projector, nothing that looked like a threat. Residents packed the room, angry about the special assessment Evelyn had proposed to defend community access. Curtis stood beside the doors with 2 guards. Evelyn raised her gavel. Mr. Mercer has issued demands designed to intimidate this association into surrendering lawfully maintained property. I sat in the front row and said nothing. She summarized my offer with careful omissions. No mention of the expired emergency passage. No mention of the 22-foot boundary shift. She told residents I wanted the lien removed, the gate opened, and an audit imposed by outsiders. What happens if we refuse? A man near the aisle asked. Evelyn looked directly at me. We reinforce the entrance, authorize litigation funding, and protect Briar Glen from coercion. Laura slid a page across the table toward me. The proposed board resolution. It approved another special assessment, continued exclusion of Daniel Mercer, permanent reinforcement of both access points, and funding for the equestrian project's preliminary engineering. Evelyn had attached the disputed dedication exhibit as the legal basis for every action. I felt the calves metal tag in my pocket beside Dad's brass key. This was the risk. If residents approved the assessment and the court rejected our evidence, I would face an HOA with deeper funding while my farm carried a lien, no operating credit, and no cattle lease. I could lose the property before I ever cleared the road. Evelyn invited me to speak. I stood. I'm offering 30 days for Briar Glen to move regular traffic to the public entrance it already owns. Emergency vehicles can continue using Mercer Lane during the transition. Residents won't be stranded. A woman in the second row frowned. Evelyn said you planned to lock us in. I said no such thing. Curtis shifted near the doors. I placed one photograph on the board table, the contractor image showing Monument 17 before the concrete pour. I did not show the archived instrument, the original correspondence, or the electronic revision history. Evelyn glanced at the photograph and gave a short laugh. That object has never been verified as a legal monument. You were standing beside it. I attend construction sites. That proves nothing. Then there's no reason to prevent an inspection. Her smile sharpened. There will be no excavation of community infrastructure. Laura spoke quietly. Is that the board's official position? Evelyn turned toward the secretary. Record it. The secretary's keyboard clicked. I let the silence stretch. Then I asked, does the board also maintain that the dedication exhibit attached to tonight's resolution is accurate? One board member leaned toward Evelyn. She covered her microphone and whispered to him. Curtis watched me without blinking. Finally, Evelyn faced the room. Yes, the exhibit is accurate, binding, and the basis of Briar Glen's ownership claim. Even after receiving our preservation demand, especially after receiving it, Laura wrote the exact words in the margin of the resolution. The vote began. Hands rose across the room. 32 in favor, 21 against. The resolution passed. Applause broke out behind Evelyn as Curtis stepped forward with a contractor authorization. She signed it in blue ink, directing Vance Security to reinforce the eastern barrier at Ruth's pasture the next morning and preserve exclusive HOA control over both entrances. Then she signed the litigation assessment. 2 signatures. 1 recorded meeting. 1 disputed map adopted again after formal warning. Evelyn capped her pen and looked at me as if she had finally closed the farm around my throat. Curtis opened the clubhouse door. You heard the board, Mercer. Stay away from both gates. Laura gathered the signed resolution, the certified minutes request, and the audio recording receipt the HOA secretary had stamped when we entered. Outside, I heard Evelyn's supporters cheering through the walls. I looked at Laura. She touched the stamped receipt once. The last thing we needed was now part of Briar Glen's own official record. At 8:03 the next morning, Curtis's contractors rolled toward Ruth's pasture with a post driver, 2 security trucks, and the signed authorization Evelyn had approved in front of 53 witnesses. Laura and I were already there. So was Miguel Santos from County Land Development, standing beside a court-appointed survey crew with the inspection order clipped to his vest. Evelyn arrived 3 minutes later in a white SUV, stepped into the dust, and held up the board resolution like a badge. This is HOA-controlled property, she said. Those contractors are authorized to proceed. Miguel looked at the stamped order in his hand. No construction until the boundary inspection is complete. Evelyn pointed toward Monument 17 beneath the main barrier. That object is not a verified monument, and excavation risks active utility lines. The same claim. Publicly repeated. After the permits. After the preservation demand. After the recorded vote. Miguel opened the utility packet. There are no registered lines beneath that footing. For the first time, Evelyn's eyes moved toward Curtis. The contractors cut power to the barrier and chipped away the concrete in controlled sections. Every strike echoed down Mercer Lane. Residents gathered behind the security booth, phones raised. Some had voted against me. Most had voted against the version of me Evelyn invented. The old stone appeared slowly, gray, scarred, and exactly where Dad said it would be. The surveyor cleaned its face with a soft brush. A carved 17 emerged from the dirt. I didn't speak. He set his instrument over the marker, then checked the other historic points from the 1948 Mercier record. Numbers flashed across his screen. He ran them again. Western boundary is 22 feet east of the recorded HOA exhibit, he said. That single sentence moved Mercer Lane, the barrier, and most of the security booth back onto my farm. Evelyn recovered fast. Historical markers can be displaced. The recorded dedication controls. Laura handed the surveyor Dad's original exhibit from the bank packet. He compared its coordinates with the monument readings, then with the electronic dedication file we had obtained. The original matched the ground. The recorded version contained the manual 22-foot offset. A murmur spread through the residence. Evelyn turned toward her attorney. This could be a drafting correction. Laura placed the certified board resolution beside the file history. A correction you formally adopted again last night after being warned it conflicted with the original boundary. The HOA secretary stood near the crowd, pale and silent. Her stamped audio receipt was attached to Laura's declaration. Evelyn's statements were no longer remembered differently by opposing sides. They were timed, recorded, and entered into Briar Glen's own minutes. Curtis stepped backward toward the booth. Miguel noticed. Do not remove anything from that structure. I'm securing company equipment. You're preserving it. Curtis ignored him and opened the rear control cabinet. He pulled a black recording unit free, yanking cables hard enough to spark. 3 phones captured it. So did Miguel's body camera. A deputy ordered Curtis to set the unit down. He hesitated, then dropped it onto the pavement. Evelyn tried one last turn. This man is destabilizing an entire community over a family grudge. Ruth walked through the crowd carrying the 1948 archive copy in a clear sleeve. No, she said. You built your gate on his family's road. Nobody applauded. The silence was heavier than that. Residents began reading the financial disclosure Laura had released under the court filing. Evelyn's interest in the equestrian project, payments to her brother's company, the inflated security contract. Faces changed one by one. Anger stopped pointing at me. Miguel posted a red enforcement notice on the security booth. Unpermitted encroachment, work suspended. Then the judge's clerk called Laura. She listened, said thank you, and handed me the phone. The emergency order had been entered. The lien was frozen. The HOA was barred from controlling either farm entrance. All financial and electronic records were placed under independent preservation. Behind me, county workers raised the steel barrier for the first time since Dad's funeral. Evelyn stood beneath it as the court-appointed receiver arrived and took possession of Briar Glen's records. The court-appointed receiver walked into the Briar Glen clubhouse, changed the office locks, and sealed the filing cabinets before Evelyn could remove a single page. By afternoon, her name had disappeared from the HOA bank authorization. Curtis's access card stopped working. The steel barrier stayed raised under the emergency order while county inspectors photographed every bolt, cable, and concrete footing. For the first time in weeks, I drove down Mercer Lane without anyone asking for identification. My tires crossed the spot where Curtis had ordered me to back away. The security booth stood dark beside the road, its windows reflecting empty pasture. Beyond it, the pump house doors still carried their chain. I cut it off with county permission. The well motor coughed once, then settled into a deep mechanical hum. Water surged through the pipe and struck the bottom of the trough with a hollow metallic roar. I stood there until the dust turned black around my boots. The final court order came 6 weeks later. Laura placed it on Dad's desk beside the old maintenance letter. Mercer Lane belonged to Mercer Farm. The dedication amendment was invalid. Briar Glen's lien was void. The association had no authority over my gates, cattle, road, or frontage. The judgment required Briar Glen to repay the emergency water costs, the temporary fencing, the surveying expenses, and the documented loss from the forced cattle sale. The HOA also covered most of my legal fees. It didn't bring the herd back, but it gave the farm room to breathe again. The receiver's audit confirmed the inflated payments to Curtis's company and the contracts routed through Evelyn's brother. Evelyn resigned before the membership could remove her. Her brokerage disclosed the conflict tied to the equestrian project, and the deal collapsed when Mercer Access disappeared from the plans. The audit file went to the county and the state real estate regulator. Curtis lost the Briar Glen contract. His attempt to pull the recording unit during the inspection went to the licensing board with Miguel's body camera footage attached. No dramatic handcuffs. No courtroom shouting. Just signatures, canceled contracts, frozen payments, and doors that no longer opened for them. The homeowners elected a temporary board. 2 members came to the farm carrying folders instead of threats. They asked for time to improve Briar Glen's second public entrance before I closed regular neighborhood traffic on Mercer Lane. I gave them 60 days, not because Evelyn deserved mercy, because families who had trusted the wrong person didn't deserve to wake up trapped behind her lies. The agreement was recorded, limited, and revocable. Emergency vehicles could still pass. The HOA could not post guards, install barriers, charge fees, or claim jurisdiction. Ruth read every page before I signed. When the transition ended, county crews removed the booth and broke apart the concrete around Monument 17. I had the stone reset inside a low protective border where anyone driving past could see the carved number. The 22 stolen feet returned to the farm one survey flag at a time. Settlement money repaired the lower pasture and installed a permanent livestock water system. Mason Pike didn't return, but another local operator leased part of the acreage the following spring. The first calves arrived in a red trailer just after sunrise. One wore the old tag number from the calf I had been forced to sell. I kept that tag in Dad's desk drawer beside the court order. On the first Saturday after the wooden Mercer Farm sign went back up, Briar Glen families came for a small harvest day. Children carried pumpkins through the gate. Ruth served cider from a folding table near Monument 17. Nobody checked their names. At dusk, I walked to the entrance and wrapped my hand around Dad's brass key. The lock turned with the same dry click I had heard when the barrier dropped across my hood. This time, the gate opened because I chose to open it.